What's up, everybody? It's Kendall, and it is day 17 of 100 Days of Codes. And we're also in week 3 on the mighty day of Wednesday for School of Code. School of Code. School of Code. Been awesome. We've been having a fun week at School of Code. We've been having a fun few weeks doing 100 Days of Codes. Day 17. We're back on it today, on the attack. Here we are, YouTube, Twitter, School of Code. Yeah, boy! So, let's have it. So, big shout out to all my friends at School of Code, the School of Code fam. Great to have you on the video with me today. Big shout out to you. Big shout out to all my 100 Days of Code peeps doing their trick, doing their thing. Thanks for coming with me once again. And what are the rules of 100 Days of Code? Well, you know the score. It's code for 1 hour a day. Keep yourself accountable publicly. It's 3. Connect with the community of Twitter. But obviously, I've been finding I'm going to stretch it a little bit. I might do LinkedIn as well, that sort of thing. Keep a daily log of your progress, emotions, feelings, all those good sorts of things. So you can get all those good feel-goods or those sort of empathizing feelings, which is lovely. And so today, we're going to go through sort of some of the stuff that we went through today. So we had a guest speaker once again today, which was awesome. I believe he was a senior designer. And he was speaking on all sorts of goodness. The exact name of the company, I can't exactly remember. But we learned about things from him. He spoke about sort of his skills in this field, how he was into adverts and building components rather than sites. Talking about work-life balance. He spoke about building things correctly with accessibility, and he spoke about cross-browser compatibility. Try to say that 3 times. I'm going to. Cross-browser compatibility. Tongue twister. Cross-browser compatibility. Cross-browser compatibility. Cross-browser. Try to say that 3 times. That's my challenge to you watching at home. Cross-browser compatibility. Cross-browser compatibility. Oh my gosh, I can't do it. It's too fast. If you start speeding it up, it gets difficult. If you can do it, good on you. So, never mind 100 Days of Code. Try to say that 3 times fast, lots of times. So, they talked about tech that they commonly use in his workplace as a senior designer, where things like Node or Next.js, React, Sass, NPM, Git, AWS for storage and building pipelines, Storybook, Jest and React testing libraries. All those were really cool. I mean, I'm loving myself a bit of AWS. I was learning a bit of that before I came on School of Codes. I love a bit of Sass. I've heard it's like a souped up version of CSS, but a lot to learn on that. And we learned a bit about BEM today, block elements management, or anyways, we'll talk about that in a second. He talked about a typical sprint. So obviously they work in an agile way. So they have times in the day where essentially what they do is they do work for a certain amount of time, what they call a sprint, right? So it might be an hour and a half hour, whatever it is, that is the sprint time. And you sprint during that, and that's when you do a focused amount of work. So they talked about a typical sprint planning. He spoke about team have several planning sessions over the sprints. He said they're boring, but they're really important. He spoke about double checking that everything is ready in this planning process. So they do wireframes, designs, etc. That they agree to the work for the next 2 weeks. They break future tickets down and into an action plan. So in these workplaces, there's lots of different teams, and they break down the bigger task into smaller tickets or smaller problems, kind of like what we do at School of Code, because this is our first tech job. We keep being told to sort of tell ourselves that treat this as your first job in tech. So this is my first job. School of Code is my first job in tech. So It's awesome. Another typical sprint where he spoke about one of the most important things when you're facing a tickets or you're facing a sprint is to reread the tickets. Remember that, folks. Reread the tickets. I'm going to say it again. Reread the tickets. He said that made in big, bold writing. He talked about pre-coding prep. So before you start coding, before you make lists, make drawings, prototype. He talked about splitting the task up into smaller problems, right? As our Dr. Chris Mia says, and as Liz says, break it down, break that problem down, break it down into small chunks, makes it easier to manage. It's awesome. Feedback to the team. So there's a time where you feedback sort of in the stand-up, sort of how it's going, how you're feeling, kind of like what I'm doing today. How and where to test its codes. He talked about unit interaction, visual difference, and try to get the code to complete before the end of the sprints. So yeah, that was a little bit from our boy from the company, which was awesome, and he gave a really good talk. It was really in-depth and gives a really good idea of sort of what it was like to be a developer and to be sort of on one of these teams. And he mentioned it was really interesting to hear his perspective on progression as well. He mentioned like he was a mid-level or even a lower level, a junior level. And he said the real difference between somebody who sort of came into these mid-level and senior level roles was just the fact of being able to communicate and sort of communicate about places where there could be growth and there could be ways of talking about the code, and they were open about communication. And that was the real difference between, it wasn't necessarily always technical expertise, it might just be that level of communication. So it was very, very interesting. And then we had our dear friend Liz, Coach of the Year, and she was talking about user interface and user experience again, specifically today about user interface. And so we were exploring such things as user interface design is the process designers use to build interfaces in software or computerized devices, focusing on looks or style. So designers aim to create interfaces which users find easy to use and pleasurable. And so then there was a little picture of sort of a wireframe sort of thing of how to work that out. And we talked about sort of the visual aspect versus the human aspect. We looked about the sort of 5 steps of sort of figuring that out. So designing each individual screen with which the user will interact, considering how the app will display on various screen sizes, so like desktop size, tablet size, and mobile size, designing UI elements such as buttons, icons, sliders, and scroll bars, choosing the correct fonts and typesetting and unique color palette that injects some personality onto the website or app. We talked about things like that, and about establishing sort of a style guide and all those sorts of things. So it was really cool. We talked about the elements and principles of design, which these are apparently known across the industry. Things like, line, shape, direction, size, texture, color, balance, proximity, like where do you put things, alignment, how you align them up on the screen, repetition, maybe you're using 6 tile blocks and you're doing it later on another page, you have repetition, you use the same sort of, you have consistency. Contrast, maybe you have like one color against another that go together but that contrast one another. Or maybe you have a call to action that needs to be contrasted with some like maybe a lighter color. Spacing, all sorts of cool stuff like that. And why was there that? Because when you have that contrast, you can emphasize something and it sort of acts as a call to action, right? Or to change somebody's mind about something. And there was an example, they gave like a school of code and it said, you will read this first, and it had a white background in the middle. The text was really big, it was contrasted, and it was like a dark blue color. And then around it was like a darker color. And then there were like these little smaller texts. And your eyes were obviously attracted to the middle bits because it was a light background and it was bold text and it was sort of right in the middle. And so you looked at it first and it said, you will read this first, which we did, of course. So we saw some examples like Medium, which did a really good job of laying out and sort of that spacing, proximity, which is cool, whether it was a mobile site or whether it was the real sites as well. We talked about visual hierarchy. So we looked at Uber app and how is the map at the top and it has like where do you want to go to in the middle and how it's all balanced out. Um, what else did we look at? We looked at proximity principle. Sort of if you're filling out a form, sort of there was a big headline on the left, and there was like the fill in form like really close to each other, so it didn't look like too much. Lots of cool stuff like that. We also looked at Lighthouse, and Lighthouse is an inbuilt tool in Google Chrome, so you can check websites for accessibility. So any website, you can go into Google Chrome, go into the developer tools, and you can actually, there's console and elements, and one of the tabs, which is one of the like little more ones, so like little arrows, you click on it, and in there is one called Lighthouse. Yes, Lighthouse, I got that right. At least it's Light Club. Lighthouse. And Lighthouse, when you're on that site that you want to generate a report about, it will tell you how accessible it is. So it might say out of 100, right? And you can check out, and accessibility is huge because those who are visually impaired, or maybe those who are disabled in any way or anything like that, it's making it more accessible for them so they can see it colorblind, any of those sort of things. Maybe they use a reader, to read the site, those sort of things. And this is a good way of assessing whether our site or any site maybe has the capabilities and functionality to do that, right? We talked about how to create a wireframe today. I mean, we packed it all in today. So we talked about sort of designing a presentation style, making a grid with placeholders, and adding typography and a color palette. So they're like 3 steps. And so we talked about sort of things like sketching out a wireframe. And so at the beginning, you'd be doing something like what they call a low fidelity wireframe. And we did that in a program called Miro, right? And in Miro, you could create a black and white wireframe. So you don't put color, any of those fancy things in there, because it's just to get an idea of sort of the workflow and what it looks like and sort of get an idea. And then if you showed that to a customer, it's early on in the journey, or you showed that to your team, it's early enough in the journey where all they're commenting on is just the skeleton, the bare bones of it. And then later on, you can do a high fidelity one. And with a high fidelity, you do something like Figma, for example. And with Figma, what you can do is then you can make it look like the real McCoy. You can make it look like the real website or real app. And you can even, which was so cool, Liz showed us that actually you can take buttons, like say you had a hamburger menu for a mobile site, and you can make the little hamburger menu pop out and show like a really simple prototype of how it would work, the functionality. I was like, that is amazing. And there's other things you can use as well. There's other programs, so those are just a few. And then in the afternoon, we had an Energizer, and we had an art attack challenge. We had to talk about how we designed something, so that was quite fun. And I did one about designing something every day. So it was basically about, what we design every day. And so people did different things like pottery and stitching. And my thing that I did every day is I build Lego with my babies. So I've got a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, so we build Lego together and we get creative. And so that's a lot of fun. We talked about as well, near the end of the day, we talked about organizing our CSS. So CSS, the way you style things, how you can maintain it, how you can scale it, and how you can reuse it. So we looked at basically about naming. So your classes should be easy to read and relative in CSS. This helps your team to understand the CSS code base. We looked at about avoiding duplication of those things, thinking ahead. What else did we talk about? Understanding the cascade, they call this. So like, a cascade of waterfall. And that we need to think about the order of which we write our CSS and how that cascade affects what gets applied. So we need to understand the flow. So if you're writing something for a similar area and you make it after something, so say you had a class and then something else applied similarly to it. Well, if you write it after it, then it's going to affect what's before it. So you just got to be aware of how you're labeling things and how you're specifying where your CSS goes. And we're meant to look at this site called CSS Specificity, which is quite interesting. So we'll check that out too. And we had some videos we're meant to watch as well. So we played around with a bit of CSS, that sort of thing. We played around with some color palettes. We learned about block elements modifying. So where you might have elements that are associated with each other. They have one block they're all a part of. Like maybe a div or maybe like a class. Maybe it's .btn. And then you have .btn whatever it is and .btn whatever it is, but they're all part of the same block. They're all called .btn. One of my favorites is BEM, and that's a sort of a way that developers have come up with this sort of organize themselves in a standardized way where when somebody comes back to your code later, so somebody else came that wasn't you, and they came back to the code, they could understand what was going on. They could just add things in. Or even you came back, because we don't remember everything. You come back to your code and then you kind of know what's going on. You're like, right, cool. I come back to this. I actually know what's happening and I can just add things in. I know it needs to go into .btn. So we learned some cool stuff today. Really cool stuff today. Learned about the real world of software developments. We learned about real world sprints. We learned about cascading CSS. We learned about art attacks and what talented artists we all are. And we did some code wars in the morning and solved some problems. That was really fun. Doing some our KYUs and getting our katas on. And we just had a blast, you know. It's been so much fun, like meeting my new pair partner this week and working alongside of him and meeting his dog. That's been a lot of fun via Zoom, you know, making those connections. Working on these wireframes today has been really cool. Getting a bit of a flavor for the design sides. But not forgetting our coding as well. That's been really fun. Had a really good interaction with like a couple assistant coaches, which is cool. Got some really good helpful feedback. So, you know what? All in all, I gotta say my thoughts and feelings at the moment is I'm buzzing at the moment. I'm feeling excited. I'm learning a lot. I really like learning. I like the challenge of not knowing everything. I love it just feels fun. Just feels fun. I mean, do I feel like I know everything? No. Do I feel lost sometimes? Yeah. But you know what? There's such a good community here. We have such good boot campers, such good people that we're working with, amazing coaches. There's just support all around. Enablement coaches or mentors, or tomorrow we're going to be having a mindset thing. So we're talking about mindset every week. I mean, it's a blast. We're having the time of our lives here, guys. So we're floating on cloud 9. You know what? We're having a good time. So we're just gonna keep having a good time, having a good time. Yeah, I know. Bit of Queen, just throw it in there. Why not? I don't know why, but the other song came to my head. Do you remember that song that goes, bicycle, bye? I want to ride my bicycle, I want to ride my bike, I want to code a bicycle, I want to code a bike. Oh gosh, losing it now. It is about 10:20. Anyways, guys, as always, it is day 17 of 100 days of code. And guys, it's been real amazing. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow. 100 days of code. Tomorrow, day 18. Guys, have a wonderful night. Peace out. And we'll see you on the next one.